Cowboy rented a house for one night, but found an Apache woman hiding there in the Wild West. The sun was sinking behind the jagged mountains, painting the sky with deep orange and purple hues. A lone cowboy rode slowly along the dusty trail, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of sand. He had been traveling for many days, moving from town to town, following the winding roads of the Wild West. His hat was pulled low over his face, shielding him from the harsh rays of the late afternoon sun, and his long coat flapped slightly in the wind. The cowboy's eyes were tired but sharp, scanning the horizon for any sign of a town or a place to rest. He had learned long ago that traveling in the Wild West was not easy. The land was vast and often unforgiving, with miles of open desert, rocky hills, and sparse water. Towns were few and far between, and some were little more than clusters of wooden buildings surrounded by dirt streets. The cowboy had spent his life moving from one place to another, carrying only what he could on his horse. Each night he needed a safe place to sleep, a roof over his head, and sometimes a warm meal to keep his strength up for the next day's journey. As he rode further, he finally spotted the outline of a small town in the distance. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney, and he could see a few people moving around, finishing their daily chores. The town looked quiet, almost empty, but it gave him hope. He urged his horse forward, feeling relief as the horse's hooves hit the wooden planks of the town's main street. The sound echoed in the stillness, announcing his arrival. The cowboy stopped near the center of the town, taking in his surroundings. There was a small saloon with its swinging doors slightly open, a general store with goods stacked outside, and a stable where a few horses were tied. A blacksmith was finishing work in the corner of the street, hammering the last nails into a wagon wheel. The town had a calm, peaceful feel, though the cowboy knew that peace in the Wild West was often only temporary. Trouble could arrive at any moment, and danger could hide in the quietest corners. He guided his horse toward the stable and spoke to the man in charge. "I'll need a place to keep my horse for the night," he said, his voice steady but polite. The stableman gave a small nod and directed him to a spot near the back where his horse could rest safely. After tying the reins, the cowboy patted the horse's neck gently. "Rest up, friend. We've got a long day tomorrow." The horse snorted softly, as if understanding, and shifted its weight onto 3 legs, easing the tension from its long journey. Now that his horse was settled, the cowboy turned his attention to finding a place to stay. He asked a passerby about lodging, and the man pointed toward a house on the outskirts of town. "Old Thompson owns it. Wooden place, quiet, not many visitors. Should be good for a night," the man said. The cowboy nodded his thanks and made his way down a narrow dirt path lined with dry bushes and rocks. The path was uneven, but he knew the terrain well enough to navigate without trouble. The house was small and made of weathered wood, with a chimney that looked like it hadn't seen repair in a long time. Its windows were simple, with a few panes cracked from age, but the cowboy didn't mind. He only needed a place to rest, a roof to keep him safe from the night air, and maybe a little fire to warm him. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, an older man appeared. His face was lined with age and experience, and his eyes held a cautious but friendly expression. "I'd like to rent the house for one night," the cowboy said. "Just for tonight." The landlord studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, one night stay is fine. That'll be a few coins." The cowboy handed over the payment, and the man gave him a simple key, warning him about the creaky floors in the old fireplace. "Watch your step. Floorboards are loose, and be careful with the fire. It's been a while since anyone used that hearth," the landlord said with a small smile. The cowboy thanked him and stepped inside. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A small table stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a few wooden chairs. A bed with a thin mattress rested against the far wall, and a small fireplace waited to provide warmth. Dust covered some corners, but it didn't bother him. The house had a quiet charm, the kind that came from years of standing alone in the desert, weathering storms and surviving the harsh land. After placing his belongings down, the cowboy set about making himself comfortable. He gathered some firewood he found near the fireplace and lit a small fire, watching as the flames danced and crackled. The warmth spread through the room, easing the chill that came with the desert night. He hung his coat over a chair and took off his hat, letting his hair fall into place. The sound of the fire was soothing, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm. As he unpacked, he noticed the little details of the house, the scratches on the wooden floor, the marks on the walls where pictures once hung, and the small shelf by the window holding a few trinkets. It was clear that someone had lived here, someone who cared for the house despite its simplicity. He wondered about the people who had stayed here before him, imagining their lives and the stories the walls might hold. Night deepened, and the cowboy sat near the fire, letting his thoughts wander. He thought about the trails he had ridden, the towns he had passed through, and the people he had met along the way. He remembered the challenges, the harsh storms, the wild animals, and the times he had been forced to rely on his wits and strength to survive. And yet he also remembered the kindness of strangers, the moments of laughter, and the quiet beauty of the desert under a star-filled sky. The house creaked gently as the wind blew outside, rustling the dry bushes and sending small shadows across the walls. The cowboy paused, listening carefully. The sounds were normal, the settling of the wood, the wind moving through cracks in the walls, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't completely alone. He shrugged the thought away, telling himself that in a place like this, imagination often played tricks on the mind. He was used to traveling alone, and he knew how easy it was to let thoughts wander in an empty house at night. He prepared a simple meal by the fire, heating some beans and bread he had carried in his pack. The smell of the food filled the small room, mixing with the scent of burning wood. He ate slowly, savoring the warmth and comfort after a long day on the trail. As he finished, he cleaned his small pan and set it aside, then leaned back in his chair, letting the quietness of the night wash over him. The desert was silent, except for the occasional distant howl of a coyote or the rustle of the wind. Soon, he was ready to rest. He checked the bed, adjusting the thin mattress and making it as comfortable as possible. The fire had died down to glowing embers, providing just enough warmth to keep the night chill at bay. He placed his rifle within reach, as was his habit, and settled under the thin blanket. The day had been long, and his body ached from riding and carrying his pack. Despite the fatigue, his mind remained alert, aware that in the Wild West danger could appear at any moment. As he drifted into a light sleep, the cowboy felt a strange sense of anticipation, though he couldn't explain why. Something about the quiet house, the shadows in the corners, and the stillness of the desert night made him feel that this night might be different from any other. But for now, he let the comfort of the fire and the peace of the small house lull him into rest. The stars shone brightly through the window, and the moon cast a gentle light across the room, marking the beginning of a night that would be far from ordinary. The night deepened, and the cowboy's eyes opened slowly. Something had stirred him from his light sleep. At first he thought it was just the wind, whistling softly through the cracks of the old wooden house. But then he heard it again, a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the back of the room. It was so soft that it could have been imagined, but the cowboy was experienced enough to know the difference. He sat up slowly, keeping his movements quiet, and listened carefully. The sound was subtle, like a shifting of weight on the wooden floor or the faint rustle of a blanket. The cowboy's hand instinctively went to the rifle lying across a chair. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. In the Wild West, strange noises at night were common. Animals, the wind, even the creaking of the house itself. But there was something different about this sound, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He rose from the bed and moved toward the source of the noise. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers, casting shadows across the small room. Every shadow seemed larger than it should be, twisting and stretching as the embers flickered. The cowboy's boots made soft creaking noises on the wooden floor, and he paused whenever a louder creak echoed back at him. His eyes scanned the corners of the room, checking under the table, behind the chairs, and along the walls. Everything seemed empty, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. He noticed small details he had not seen before. A slight indentation in the dust near the back door, as if someone had been there recently. A blanket folded unevenly on a chair, as though it had been left in a hurry, and faint marks along the floor that looked like footprints, but too small for a grown man. Something was not right. He had rented the house expecting a quiet night, and yet the signs were clear. Someone or something had been here. He moved closer to the back of the house, taking care to stay quiet. The wind outside blew gently, making the wooden walls groan and the old windows rattle. Each sound was magnified in the silent house, and the cowboy felt a mixture of caution and curiosity. He had been on the trails long enough to know that surprises could be dangerous, and he could not afford to take chances. With his rifle ready, he gently opened the door to a small storage area, hoping to find nothing more than old supplies. The room was dimly lit by the fading embers of the fire. Crates and old barrels were stacked along the walls, and the scent of dust and wood filled the air. Everything looked untouched except for a small pile of blankets in the corner. The cowboy's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. There was movement, a subtle shift under the blankets. He froze, holding his breath, and waited. The movement stopped, as if whoever or whatever was there had sensed his presence. The cowboy's experience told him to stay calm. He lowered his rifle slightly, though he did not relax completely. Slowly, he spoke in a calm voice. "I don't mean any harm. I'm just staying here for the night." There was no answer. only silence. He waited, watching the blankets, and then another small movement caught his eye. A hand emerged from under the blankets, delicate and wary. The cowboy's heart raced, but he stayed composed. He had seen many people in need on the trail, and he knew that fear could make someone hide, even from the kindest stranger. "Who's there?" he asked softly, taking another careful step forward. The hand withdrew quickly, and then, to his surprise, a voice answered, soft, cautious, and almost trembling. "Please, don't hurt me." The cowboy's eyes widened slightly. It was a woman's voice. In all his travels, he had rarely encountered women alone in the wilderness, especially in remote towns like this one. He lowered his rifle fully now, though he kept it ready, and took a deep breath. "I won't hurt you," he said gently. "I'm just here for the night. You can trust me." The woman stayed hidden under the blankets, but the fear in her voice was clear. She was clearly exhausted, scared, and desperate to remain unseen. The cowboy could understand that. He had lived through many dangerous encounters and knew what it was like to be afraid of people you didn't know. Slowly, the woman emerged from her hiding place. She was young, with dark hair tangled from travel and dirt smudged on her face and hands. Her clothes were worn and torn, evidence of a long and difficult journey. The cowboy noticed the determination in her eyes, but also the fear. She seemed ready to flee at any moment, but for some reason she had stayed. Perhaps she felt that he was different from others, or maybe she had no other choice. "Who are you?" the cowboy asked quietly, trying to keep his voice calm and welcoming. He did not want to scare her further. "My name is Nayeli," she said softly. I'm just trying to survive." Her words were careful, measured, as if she feared that any mistake might bring danger. The cowboy nodded, understanding more than words could explain. In the Wild West, survival was a daily challenge, and anyone who had made it this far had endured hardships beyond imagination. The cowboy gestured toward the fire. "Sit by the fire, you can warm yourself." "I have some food, too." He spoke slowly, giving her time to decide. Nayeli hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to enter at any moment, but the cowboy stayed where he was, giving her space and showing no sign of threat. Slowly, she approached the fire, careful with each step. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the cold desert night outside, and she sank down on the floor near the hearth, her eyes never leaving the cowboy's face. He offered her a small portion of the beans and bread he had prepared. She looked at it for a moment, then took it with shaking hands. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the old wooden house. The cowboy studied her carefully. She was clearly skilled at surviving in the wild, but exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. He could see small scratches on her arms and dirt ingrained in her clothes. It was clear she had traveled a long distance on foot, avoiding danger at every turn. After a few moments, Nayeli spoke again. I couldn't go to the town. People, they would take me away." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The cowboy nodded, understanding her fear. He knew that the world outside could be cruel, especially to those trying to escape danger. He did not press for details, knowing that trust had to be earned slowly, especially in the Wild West. Instead, he spoke about the house and the town in simple terms, trying to make her feel safe. "This house is mine for the night. No one will come here unless I call them. You can stay hidden if you need to. I won't let anyone harm you." Nayeli's eyes softened slightly, and she nodded. For the first time that night, there was a flicker of relief on her face. Hours passed, and the night outside grew colder. The wind howled through the desert, rattling the old windows and making the wooden walls groan. The cowboy kept the fire going, tossing in small pieces of wood to keep the warmth steady. Nayeli stayed close to the flames, occasionally glancing toward the shadows in the corners of the room. The quiet of the house was both comforting and tense. It was a strange moment of peace in a night that had begun with fear and uncertainty. The cowboy shared stories of his travels, long rides across the desert, encounters with wild animals, and the challenges of surviving in a land that was often unforgiving. Nayeli listened quietly, her eyes wide with curiosity and cautious interest. She did not speak much, but her attention showed that she appreciated the company and the sense of safety. In return, she shared small details about her journey, how she had evaded danger, where she had traveled, and how she had survived alone. Each story revealed her courage and determination, and the cowboy could not help but respect her strength. By the time the first light of dawn touched the edges of the horizon, the tension in the house had eased slightly. The cowboy and Nayeli had formed an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement of trust and respect. The night had been long, full of fear, uncertainty, and careful observation, but it had also shown the resilience of both the wandering cowboy and the determined young woman. They had faced the unknown together, each careful not to threaten the other, and each learning something about courage, survival, and trust. As the sun began to rise, casting golden light across the desert outside, the cowboy finally allowed himself a moment of rest. He leaned back in his chair, watching Nayeli as she sat quietly by the fire. The night had been strange, full of signs that something was hidden, and yet it had ended with a fragile sense of safety. The cowboy knew that the desert would bring more challenges, but for now, in this small wooden house on the edge of town, they had found a moment of peace in the Wild West. The first light of dawn spilled into the small wooden house, illuminating dust particles dancing in the warm early rays. The cowboy stirred slowly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long ride and the tension of the previous night. Outside, the desert was quiet, except for the soft rustling of dry bushes and the occasional distant cry of a coyote. He had spent many nights in the wilderness, but something about this house felt different. He was not entirely alone, and the knowledge of another human presence made him cautious and alert. Nayeli, the young Apache woman, remained seated near the fireplace, her knees drawn close to her chest. Her dark eyes reflected both wariness and relief, and the cowboy could tell that the events of the night had left a deep impression on her. Despite the exhaustion in her posture, there was a quiet strength about her that demanded respect. She had endured much to reach this place, and now, in the safety of the house, she seemed to be gathering her thoughts and energy for what lay ahead. The cowboy moved carefully across the creaking wooden floor, careful not to startle her. "Morning," he said softly. "You slept well?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, as if he understood that words alone could not erase fear. Nayeli looked up, and for the first time a faint smile crossed her face. "As well as I could," she replied. Her voice was still quiet, almost hesitant, but it carried a hint of trust. They shared a simple breakfast, a continuation of the meal from the night before. The cowboy had heated some water for coffee, and Nayeli drank slowly, savoring the warmth. The small gestures, the sharing of food, a quiet conversation, the careful attention to each other's comfort, helped build a fragile bridge of trust between them. Both knew that the world outside the house was dangerous, and both understood the value of caution. Yet in that small space, a connection was forming, subtle but undeniable. After breakfast, the cowboy began to explore the house more carefully. He checked the locks on the doors and examined the windows. The house was old, certainly not built to resist intruders, but it offered a degree of privacy that neither of them could afford outside. As he moved, he noticed small signs that confirmed his suspicions from the night before. Footprints in the dust, a blanket slightly disturbed, and marks on the walls where someone had leaned heavily. Each detail told a story, and the cowboy's mind worked quickly, piecing together the possible dangers Nayeli had faced. Finally he turned to her and asked gently, "You've been running from someone?" Nayeli hesitated, her eyes flickering with caution. The cowboy did not press further, understanding that trust was earned slowly. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had to leave my village. People's soldiers. They were looking for me. I had to hide." Her words were carefully chosen, and the weight of them carried the history of hardship, loss, and fear. The cowboy nodded, understanding more than words could convey. He had encountered many who had fled danger, and he knew that bravery often came in quiet, hidden ways. The morning passed slowly, the small house filled with the sounds of careful movement and soft conversation. The cowboy and Nayeli began to share more about themselves, though each held back details, unsure of the other's reactions. He spoke of life on the trails, of long days riding under the scorching sun, and nights spent under a blanket of stars. Nayeli listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her curiosity growing alongside a cautious sense of comfort. In return, Nayeli shared fragments of her journey. She spoke of her homeland, the land of her people, and the beauty of the mountains and rivers she had left behind. She spoke of the dangers she had faced, of traveling alone through deserts and forests, and of avoiding people who would not understand or would do her harm. The cowboy listened carefully, his respect for her courage growing with each word. He had seen hardship before, but the resilience she displayed was remarkable. As the day wore on, the desert sun climbed higher, casting harsh light through the windows. The cowboy suggested that they rest during the hottest hours, as the heat could be exhausting and dangerous. Nayeli agreed, lying down near the fire, while the cowboy settled in a chair, keeping a careful watch on the room and the small windows. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Each respected the other's space and safety, knowing that survival often depended on patience, vigilance, and quiet observation. Later, the cowboy decided to prepare the area around the house for any possible danger. He inspected the perimeter, noting the dry bushes and rocks that could hide someone approaching. He gathered some small sticks and stones, arranging them in a pattern that would make it obvious if anyone tried to enter unnoticed. It was a simple precaution, but it gave both of them a sense of security. When he returned, Nayeli was sitting quietly by the fire, watching him carefully. She gave a small nod of approval, acknowledging his efforts without words. This afternoon passed in a mix of quiet activities. The cowboy repaired a small crack in the floor near the door, while Nayeli cleaned and organized the small space, moving things to make the room feel safer and more comfortable. Their movements were careful, deliberate, as if both were aware that even small actions could signal intentions. Despite the tension, there was a growing sense of teamwork. Each was learning to trust the other, not just in words, but in actions, and that trust was strengthening with every passing hour. As the sun began to descend, casting long shadows across the room, the cowboy and Nayeli began to discuss the next steps. She needed to move on eventually, to continue her journey to safety, and he needed to return to his trails. Yet, both understood that the bond formed in a single night could not be ignored. The cowboy offered to guide her part of the way, to help her navigate the desert and avoid dangers she could not see. Nayeli hesitated, weighing the risk and the trust she felt, before finally nodding in agreement. The evening brought a gentle calm, the desert wind cooling the air and rustling the dry bushes outside. The cowboy started a small fire on the hearth again, and they sat together, sharing stories and quiet conversation. Nayeli's fear had not completely vanished, but it had been replaced with a cautious hope. She realized that the cowboy was not like the others she had encountered. He had treated her with respect and kindness, offering protection without demanding anything in return. The trust between them was fragile, but it was real. Nightfall approached, and the stars began to twinkle in the clear desert sky. The cowboy prepared for another night, making sure the fire was safe and that both of them had enough warmth to endure the desert chill. He placed his rifle within easy reach, a silent promise of protection, while Nayeli gathered her blankets and rested near the fire. The quiet of the house was punctuated only by the occasional creak of wood and the distant howl of desert wildlife. Before sleep claimed them, the cowboy and Nayeli shared one final conversation for the night. They spoke of the journey ahead, of the importance of trust, and of the need to remain vigilant in a land where danger was always nearby. Nayeli's voice was calm but firm, and the cowboy admired her courage and intelligence. He knew that this night, like the previous one, would leave a lasting mark on both of them. They had faced fear together, navigated uncertainty, and formed a connection that neither had expected. As the fire's glow faded to embers, the cowboy leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet of the house settle around him. Nayeli lay near the hearth, her eyes closed but her breathing steady. The night would be long, and the desert could be unforgiving, but for now, they had found a moment of peace. The bond between them, built on shared experience, respect, and cautious trust, was a small victory in a vast and often dangerous world. In that small wooden house, at the edge of the desert town, two travelers, one wandering cowboy, one determined young woman, had begun to understand each other. They were strangers from different worlds, yet they shared a common need: survival, safety, and the quiet companionship that comes from knowing that someone else cares enough to watch over you, even when words are few. As the night finally deepened, the cowboy allowed himself to relax slightly, confident that Nayeli was safe and that the trust they had built would guide them through the dangers of the coming days. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, but inside the small house there was warmth, understanding, and the beginning of an unlikely partnership, one that would be tested by the challenges yet to come, but one that had already proven its strength in the quiet courage of a long night together. The first light of morning stretched across the desert, soft and golden, touching the weathered wooden house with a gentle glow. The cowboy stirred in his chair, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long nights and the careful vigilance he had kept while Nayeli rested nearby. The small room felt quieter than the night before, and yet there was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if the desert itself knew something important was about to happen. Nayeli, the young Apache woman, was already awake, sitting quietly by the fire with her dark eyes fixed on the glowing embers. She had slept more soundly than she had in days, her body finally able to rest after traveling through harsh terrain and hiding from danger. The cowboy watched her for a moment, noting the way her hands moved gently over the blanket she had kept wrapped around herself, and the way her eyes, though tired, still held the quiet strength he had come to admire. "Morning," the cowboy said softly, breaking the silence. Nayeli looked up and gave a small nod, a faint smile brushing across her face. There was no need for long words. They both understood that this morning marked a turning point. She could not stay hidden in the town forever, and he could not remain in the house indefinitely. Their paths were about to diverge, but the bond they had formed over the last nights was undeniable. The cowboy prepared a simple breakfast of bread and dried fruit, sharing it with Nayeli. They ate in silence at first, letting the calm of the morning settle over them. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, shimmering under the sunlight that was growing warmer by the minute. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The cowboy knew that the heat would soon become harsh, and he wanted to ensure that Nayeli had enough strength for the next stage of her journey. Once they had eaten, the cowboy began gathering supplies. He collected extra food, a small water skin, and a few blankets, placing them carefully by the back door where Nayeli could reach them. He did not know exactly what lay ahead for her, but he knew that preparation was key to survival in the desert. Nayeli watched him quietly, her eyes filled with gratitude and a quiet resolve. She understood that every small gesture mattered, and this act of thoughtfulness meant more than words could say. "I'll leave these here for you," the cowboy said gently. "If you need to move quickly, you'll have what you need." Nayeli nodded, her lips pressed together as she processed the gesture. She wanted to speak, to thank him properly, but words felt insufficient. Instead, she offered him a small, meaningful smile, the kind that spoke of trust, respect, and understanding. It was a smile that carried the weight of everything she had endured, and the cowboy felt a quiet pride and admiration for her strength. The morning passed slowly, the desert sun climbing higher in the sky. The cowboy suggested they wait until the heat became slightly less harsh before moving, knowing that traveling in the midday sun could be dangerous. Nayeli agreed, resting near the fire while he kept a careful watch on the house and the surrounding area. The quiet companionship between them was comforting, a rare moment of peace in a world that often offered little safety. As the sun began its descent toward midday, the cowboy finally spoke about the journey ahead. "You'll need to move carefully," he said. "The desert is wide, and there are people who might not understand your situation. Take the northern trail. It's less traveled, and there's water along the way." Nayeli listened attentively, her dark eyes steady. She absorbed every detail, knowing that these instructions could mean the difference between safety and danger. "I'll be fine," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "I've traveled far already. I can handle the desert." The cowboy nodded, knowing that she spoke the truth. Her courage and determination had been evident from the first night, and he had seen her resourcefulness and intelligence in action. Yet he could not help but feel a protective instinct, a desire to ensure that she would be safe until she could reach a place of true security. After preparing everything, the cowboy and Nayeli walked outside together. The morning air was warm but not yet oppressive, and the vast desert stretched out in every direction. The sun cast long shadows from the rocks and bushes, creating a landscape of light and shadow that seemed almost alive. The cowboy mounted his horse, ready to continue his journey, while Nayeli prepared to move on her own path, the supplies he had left by the door carefully packed in her bag. Before parting, the cowboy gave her a few final words of advice. "Stay alert, trust your instincts, and don't go out of your way to be seen. The desert can be unforgiving, but it can also be your ally if you respect it." Nayeli nodded, her eyes reflecting both determination and gratitude. She understood the weight of his words and the sincerity behind them. She had already survived so much, and this guidance was another tool to help her continue. The moment of parting was quiet but meaningful. Neither needed to say much. The bond they had formed over the nights of fear, trust, and shared survival was clear. The cowboy touched the brim of his hat in a small, respectful gesture, and Nayeli responded with a nod that spoke volumes. They had shared a brief but significant chapter of their lives, one that would remain with them long after the desert trails had carried them apart. As Nayeli disappeared down the northern trail, moving carefully through the sparse bushes and rocks, the cowboy watched for a moment before urging his horse forward. The wind carried the sound of her footsteps faintly, mingling with the distant calls of desert wildlife. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had the tools, guidance, and courage to continue her journey safely. The desert was still wide and dangerous, but she had proven herself capable, and the memory of their shared nights in the wooden house would serve as a reminder of resilience and trust. The cowboy rode away slowly, his thoughts lingering on the small house and the young woman who had hidden there. He had witnessed bravery, determination, and strength that few could imagine. The encounter had been unexpected, a moment of human connection in a harsh and unforgiving land. He knew that the stories of the Wild West were full of tales of danger and survival, but this one, small and quiet, would stay with him longer than most. By the time he reached the outskirts of the town, the sun was higher in the sky, casting the desert in bright light. He paused for a moment, looking back toward the small wooden house, now just a shadow among the dry bushes and rocks. The memory of the night, the discovery of Naeli, and the quiet conversations they had shared filled him with a sense of respect and reflection. The Wild West was often harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where unexpected connections could form, where trust and courage could create moments of humanity amidst the wilderness. Naeli, moving carefully along the northern trail, felt the warmth of the morning sun on her face and the weight of the supplies the cowboy had left for her. She paused briefly, taking in the landscape around her, the vast desert, the distant mountains, and the endless sky above. Every step was measured, every movement cautious, but she felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. She had survived the night, found temporary safety, and received guidance that would help her navigate the challenges ahead. As she continued her journey, she thought of the cowboy and the small house that had offered shelter and protection. The memory of the fire, the shared meals, and the quiet understanding between them gave her strength. She knew that the desert would continue to test her, that danger could appear at any moment, but she also knew that she was not alone in spirit. The kindness and guidance of the cowboy had created a bond, a silent promise that someone had cared enough to help her when it mattered most. The day stretched on and the desert heat grew stronger, but Naeli moved with skill and awareness, using the advice given to her to stay safe and find the best paths. The small supplies from the cowboy were invaluable, providing nourishment and comfort during the hardest hours. She relied on her instincts, her knowledge of the land, and the lessons learned from the brief time in the wooden house. Each step was a testament to her resilience, a reflection of the courage that had brought her this far. As the sun began to lower again toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, both the cowboy and Naeli felt the impact of their encounter in different ways. The cowboy continued along his trail, thinking about the stories of the people he met, the lives he touched and was touched by, and the moments of unexpected connection that made the hardships of the Wild West meaningful. Naeli moved steadily through the desert, her mind focused on survival, yet carrying the quiet comfort of knowing that someone had stood beside her, if only for a short time. The memory of the small wooden house, the fire, the shared meals, and the cautious conversations would stay with both of them. In a land as vast and often unforgiving as the Wild West, such moments were rare, and their significance was felt deeply. It was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness, trust, and courage could emerge, leaving a lasting impression that could guide and strengthen a person long after the encounter had ended. By nightfall, Naeli had found temporary shelter among the rocks and bushes, careful to remain hidden and safe. She set up a small space to rest, her mind reflecting on the events of the past days. The cowboy, far along his own trail, found a quiet place to camp for the night, thinking about the young woman he had helped and the story they had shared. Both were aware that the journey ahead would continue to test them, but the shared experiences had left a lasting mark, a quiet proof of resilience, courage, and human connection. And so, in the vastness of the Wild West, two travelers went their separate ways, carrying with them a memory that would not fade. One was a wandering cowboy, accustomed to solitude but touched by the presence of another human in need. The other was a young Apache woman, determined to survive and navigate a world filled with danger, yet strengthened by the kindness and guidance she had received. Their paths had crossed for a brief moment, but the impact of that crossing would endure, a quiet story of trust, courage, and the unexpected bonds that the wilderness could create.